This is Martin here, just doing a sound check.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Minutes up.
Thanks.
So you all ready to go? We have quorum. Called meeting to order. We acknowledge that we're located on the traditional territory of the Lakotach people. First, adoption of public agenda.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Petition and delegations? None. Adoption of previous meeting minutes. That the minutes of the regular meeting held with Municipal Service Committee on June 12th. Geez, that's a long time ago.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Second, thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Business arising? None. Public considerations? None. Chair's report? None. Staff report? Grant aid policy review. That the report from the CAO be received?
So moved.
Excuse me. Second from Director Chapman. Discussion?
So maybe I'll speak to this, Mr. Chair. So this was referred to from the board and was referred to both the Electoral Area Services Committee and the Municipal Services. We have been at this for years. What you have here is the draft policy. Some of you who have been around here for a long time have seen it. We just cannot seem to get synergy with the electoral area directors and the board members on a policy review. And we have gone through with previous boards many iterations and created a draft policy that basically has no alignment between the electoral areas and the municipal directors, if you will. And so here we are again, back at the table looking at the grant and aid policy for input from the committee. I can tell you, if it helps or means anything, issues that I think, and Julie, maybe you can help me out if I leave any off the table, issues are about grants and aid. I think electoral area directors see the grants and aid coming to them and for their approval, and them having difficulties accepting that they're grants that come to the board and need the board's approval. And so one of the issues been long-standing contention is that grants and aid should come to the staff, and the staff will prepare them, put them on the table for the committees and the boards will vote on them. So some of the issues we've had in the past, Director Lanyon brought it up, I was happy to hear him say it, not me, is that I'll say 99.9% of the time, we have only got grants that have been presented to us that the director supports, which leaves to reason that the ones that don't support are independently filtered by the director and don't make it to the board. So that was the impetus of, again, having the grants come to staff, of which the EA directors vehemently oppose that. That's one issue. Another is the electoral areas are attempting to create their own grant and aid service, which again I don't think is an awful thing. They like to have their own independent vote on that, but still we'll have and we should have regional grants and a grant and aid program that comes to this board. I've said it many times. I think when you see folks looking for money, they knock on everybody's door, and Campbell River basically ends up paying, and other municipalities, twice. You know, my humble advice has been to Campbell River is that I would issue many, many fewer grants at the city and have folks come to here and populate it. You get a discount on it, and then you don't have to double dip on them. So I think a regional grants and aid is good here. It's always will be the board, and the board vote on it. So having a policy that, I think one of the tricky things is having a policy that aligns with this board. Like, I don't think it would be that challenging if I said to this group, okay, all those grants, when people are approaching you, just tell them to submit them to the financial officer. I doubt there's a person here that would oppose that. So we write that into the policy, but the EA directors really oppose that, as they want those grants to come to themselves first and then provide their recommendation. And it's really, really difficult to get them to accept that those are really grants that come to the board. So that's a big sticking point in the policy. The other things, I don't really know, and we don't really, we discussed it probably for an hour at East this morning. We don't really get past the first point when we're discussing the policy. The rest of them are like whether they provide financial statements, whether they can go to non-government organizations, so on and so forth. We have a lot of challenges with those. One went through East this morning, which was a grant in part anyways to the school district. And we have a policy in our current grant and aid policy that says we don't give money to senior levels of government. So the EAs want to give grants out to in ways that this board doesn't. So, but we can only really have, whether we have two services, we can only really have one grant and aid policy. It doesn't really make sense to say, okay, if you're asking for a regional grant, give it to the CFO, and if you're applying for an EA grant, give it here, and we have different sets of rules. So the goal is to try and create a universal grant and aid policy. And I think the easier thing is for this group, I don't think there's much opposition, but to make it a board policy. And it's likely that we'll just never get collaboration from the EAs on it, but bring the two together, decide on one, have it be policy, and move on from that. Because it seems to me it's just a waste of time trying to get alignment, because we just can't. They're adamantly opposed to a number of things in here that I don't think this group has any opposition to. So.
Director Kerr.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Leach, for your words. At the city, we're working on a new policy for our grant needs. And, I think, seeing as we are paying the bulk of the grants from the SRD, I think it would be really good before we finish yours is to get them in alignment, like, I think it's probably in camera right now, but anyway. I think staff could certainly work with you over at the city of making, because I agree with you. It makes sense to me from a city point of view that if we've got regional nonprofits approaching us, that it be going through here. It not be going through the city and then we come here and then get the same damn thing here. So, but I think from a staff point of view of actually crafting policy, that would be really good if you guys sat down together and worked on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it would make any sense for us to misalign on the city's policy. I think we need alignment. Here, look, I have a couple humble opinions. Like, when you give money out to folks, I think you get one attaboy out of it. So if you're Campbell River, if you give, like, look, it's just no secret. There's going to be something coming to, we have a committee of the whole meeting next week, and part of it is allocations on there. So I know myself and Ben have had lots of chats about that, but it'll reveal itself, the weight of Campbell River's allocations throughout the regional district. Like, look, they're heavy, okay? So that's just the way it is. It's not good, bad, or indifferent. But so when you look at that, I would say, you're a product of those circumstances, so why not take those same product and, let's say, apply it to the grants and aid, right? So, I would say create a policy that, directs folks likely to hear. You're gonna get recognition for that. You can claim that you're a supporter of them, and you can pay 70 cents on the dollar instead of $1.70 on the dollar, and still provide support to those. I think you can likely cut your grants and aid budget at the city, and redirect a portion of it here, and net be cheaper and still provide support for others. So I think 100% we should align on that, and I would be shocked in any of those policies that it wouldn't be stuff that we can't quickly agree to. I think what the board is ultimately gonna have to do is decide how important it is in, 1, 2, 3 factors about where those requests come from, and, who they can go to. I can tell you that's a sticking point as well, is that, should they go to other senior levels of government, right? Should the requests come here? Should there be limits on them, right? Regional districts, offer services, whether you're doing recreation or dog control, you need a service. You could be 10 million bucks, you can be $10,000. But we have a history of grants and aid that is offering groups the same amount of money every year. And so if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And so we offer, if we had a group came here every year for 10 years and said, I need 10 grand for X, Y, and Z, you'd likely hear me say, let's establish a service and provide funding for them. But we do it more ad hoc with the electoral areas. And, I'm not sure that's the intent of grant and aid, to provide continually operating funds annually to groups. So there's going to be some things, motivation is probably different between these and the member munis. But again, I think at some point, we're just going to put a policy together and vote on it collectively as a board, and we live with that, and knowing that you're not going to align with the whole group. And we've done this for years and years and years and years, right? But again, aligning with Camp River, I completely agree, and I think what we'll do is we can take a pause or just do it concurrently, get line of sight on what's coming through, have some meetings with staff, figure that out, and make sure these two align, and make it, financially responsible to provide funds to the groups, and not, again, I found it myself, this, frustrating over the years, that seeing groups come to Camp River, then coming here, and you just get one pat on the back. So if you want to provide them more money, that's fine as well, but it should be a one-stop shop. And it's just what groups do. In case you don't know, they go everywhere, right? And you can't blame them. They're looking for money, and they send a blanket letter to everybody. And as much mud will stick on the wall, they'll take it, right? They don't understand local government or how it works with the funding options. So there needs to be some kind of consolidation between that, and then some guidelines for policy.
Still on receipt, we have Director Davis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Interesting discussion. I think I've been around long enough that I've been here before on this discussion. So option A here, is that as it is, more or less in alignment with the City of Campbell Rivers?
Well, I think based on Director Kerr's comments, I would say, maybe we defer the policy for a month or two in order to give time to see how the city is working and developing their policy, and to meet with them. I think that would be appropriate. If you're looking for, let's say, a resolution or direction today, I think it's a little bit premature. It was more about, let's have some discussion philosophically about things, so maybe that will help in the development of it. What do people feel about, the groups that get the money, where the money goes? Is there limits to the money? That would be helpful.
Okay, because I'm happy with the policy as I see it here, but I'm also willing to accept the direction of staff if you're talking about creating a third motion here.
Director Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. And I just noticed that there is not any, that I could see, any requirement to report back on the use of the funds, whether it was successful or not, if it was a program they were offering. Should we be including something like that in the policy so we know that first, the funds were used appropriately, and secondly, that if sorry. Oh, it is in here? Yes, it's as a condition, yeah. Thought I read that somewhere. Okay, good. My inquiry is answered.
But it's still a good question because if I can, that doesn't mean there's alignment from everybody on there. We put things in there that we gathered from other policy and what seems to make, a lot of sense. But just because you see it there, I won't guarantee there's alignment on the group on it, so.
Any further questions? Director Sinnott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the main point of having this policy is have transparency and accountability for the use of public dollars. I don't have an understanding at this point, perhaps staff can tell me, what are the budget amounts that we're spending on these grants, both from the point of the EA funds and then from the point of the general funds. So I have an idea. I also don't understand why we have a $5,000 limit, because when we start talking about alignment with the city, and I can just think of the example right now, the Community Foundation came and I think they got 5,000 from you guys, got 10,000 from the city. Now we've got a Quadra Foundation, so they're probably going to go to the EA funds and get money from them. So we're talking way past that $5,000 number probably at the end if we move people into the regional, because the community foundations tend to serve regional areas, not just the city of Campbell River, because their mandate is School District 72. And if that's the mandate area, does that include other areas that are outside in our regional? Like, is that fair for your area? Because I don't think you guys are School District 72 in your area. No. Yeah. So it kind of raises these little odd questions, but
Yeah, no, they're good questions because, one, if we go back to regional grants, I think this might be only the second year that we've done it, because going back, the board wouldn't budget anything for regional grants. People would come and they'd say, oh, okay, here's $5,000 for that, or here's $10,000 for that. And we'd have to find things in our budget to rob Peter to pay Paul. And I was like, well, this isn't really fair to the other sources. So come up with an amount of money. So I'm going to say the amount regionally is 50, but, likely if there's going to be some alignment or collaboration with the city, that number would be more. The 5,000 per, again, this is just a draft that's hung around for years, was to kind of get away from, now the policy will have to, examine that a little closer, because if you're just looking at EAs or somebody and they wanting $5,000 a year, $10,000 a year, we have to put a limit on it, because it's like, okay, well, again, if you want $10,000 a year every year, then that's a service. That's just not a grant. So that's where a limit came from, but it wasn't a limit with any parameters. We could have a higher limit and put different parameters. Like if it could be $25,000, but if you've come every year for 10 years for $25,000, maybe we need to look at some other way. So there's not a whole lot of science in what you see there, just trying to get some kind of watermark in here of where we can have discussion and what's reasonable. Because you're right, if we align with the city and you've got groups, maybe you have groups regularly come for $25,000. Yes, that number needs to be larger, but then you don't want some, small society coming and saying, can I get $25,000, right? You want to have some kind of limitations depending on what they're using it for, how often they've come, what they need the money for. So again, it's just trying to get something on paper and working from there.
yeah, so if we don't have it in policy that we have to have a budget line item and then do pro rata or do 1 time or 2 times a year intake, we really don't have any control, which I don't think is terribly accountable. And it also is a waste of staff time to have to deal with ad hoc and our time.
Yeah.
Instead of having sort of a process where there's a semi-annual intake for grant requests and then they get prioritized and matrixed or assessed and recommended back for approval at a one-time basis. I mean, I perceive with the change in maybe the city policy that we're going to shift more into the regional. So we're going to ask for a bigger budget in the regional side, potentially.
And shrink the city.
Yeah, potentially.
yeah.
And then there'll be discussion of who technically should pay, depending on the types of potential
Right.
recipients. The other one I saw was it's supposed to be a not-for-profit organization, and you're supposed to give you your annual report. But we've been giving money to PACs and things. They're not not-for-profits. They're not registered. So we're not really adhering to our policies in all cases. And are we going to just do, except if we decide otherwise, not to follow our policy? Or it just seems to me that you got to have some standards that are understandable. Can anyone just sort of say, we're the whatever youth soccer club of Quadra, we didn't bother creating a society because that's expensive and cumbersome. We don't want to do that, but we still want to give them $50 or $100 or $500 to do a tournament.
Right.
I mean, I'm not really objecting to that, but I'm just sort of saying, maybe at a certain dollar value, you have to be a not-for-profit registered.
Yeah, and there's lots of conversation about that as well, right? Like requiring financial statements. So a group comes and says, I want $500 for XYZ. Well, they're not big enough. They're not organized. Okay, that's foolish. But when people want to come for 5, 10, 20, it's like, well, no, you can give a financial statement. The other thing that we've ran into in the past is that groups will make these form letters, send it to every local government out there and say, we need $25,000. Well, by the time it gets to you in the queue, they might have already raised $25,000, and we had in more than one occasion given money to an organization without knowing who else they asked, and they exceeded the amount. So it's like, okay, we keep stumbling upon these issues and needing to create a policy so that this doesn't happen, and yet running into a brick wall when we have a lack of alignment between the EAs and the munis. There's a lot of issues and it's important to have a policy for all the things we're talking about. But yeah, it happened on more than once that we've given over 100%, because it's not like everybody reports out and they say, and it's a timing issue about, oh yeah, we've got requests out for $40,000 and we're trying to get 25, and they got 30, and then they come here and we don't have a clue how much they've gotten and find out that they're already flush with cash.
I'm sorry, I just want to say, I do want to avoid the impression that the individual directors have any kind of control on where the money goes. I think it's much more important to be open to all, because I do worry that certain applicants don't bother, or they're not it's not known that they can apply for money, and deserving things aren't being prioritized. Like, so for example, when you look at the vital signs that the Camp Community Foundation does, they'll identify certain areas like senior services are being underserved. Well, if we're not getting anything from EA areas or in the regional area from seniors, well, maybe we should be seeking people out and inviting them in, because that's a need that has to be filled. And I don't know how we align that with our objectives for the regional district, whether we should be asking staff to actually create that needs analysis or use other sources like vital signs to drive where the money should go instead of the people's personal connections to directors, which I think is problematic personally. I do like the idea that it goes through staff. And the other thing is afterwards, like what the Community Foundation does is every single person who's sort of part of the granting committee or the directors had to do a report back on the grant that they were sort of assigned. So I was once assigned the Salmon Festival grant, and I had to go and attend and look and see what was happening in the Salmon Festival and take pictures and bring it back to the board and say, this is what I saw, that our money was actually being used properly. Now, that's a lot of staff work if it's $500, but if we're talking over a certain threshold amount, we may be requesting that there be social media access and that there might be a benefit back to the regional district for the ability to advertise the good that they're doing in the community.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And so you can see just even through the conversation, there's a lot of things that should be included in the policy just for levels of accountability too, right? We're likely going to have a lower level of accountability for $500 than we are for $20,000, right? So they're all important things, and they've kind of got stalled on a few issues. And I talked about it this morning too with them. I said, look, the issue is that I won't say everyone, because somebody pointed out one that wasn't, but in 10 years, 99.9% of the grants that we get were all supported. It's hard to imagine that we saw all of them. We only saw the ones that were supported. That doesn't support transparency. So who is filtering that? And that's what I shared with Director Vonish. I mean, this morning is that you're not given that autonomy in the Local Government Act, and that isn't even though that money may be coming from your community, that's not, you're one of 14 that is to come to the group and them decide, well, they're coming here with recommendations for 99.9% of them. Where are the others? Where they're not being seen. And in the past, I can certainly say, and I won't speak about current board members, these are people that are not here right now. Grants did not come from folks that were not in favor of the elected director. That's just the fact. I'm not saying the current group, but I can 100% say past group. And so they weren't given that authority to make those decisions, and yet they were, because the only way we got these grants was from those directors. They didn't come to the CFO. If they came to the CFO, I mean, I don't really care. They come, we filter them through the policy, we bring them in forward, and you make decisions on them. I mean, I don't care if you say yes or no, but every single one of them is a yes. And it's like, what are the odds of that? That seems very slim.
Director Chapman and then Director Colburn.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies to the committee. I made notes at home and forgot them there. But item 10, on the reporting back on the grants, I think we want to make sure, depending on the threshold limit we want to put on, as to whether or not the grants were effective. So let me give you an example. And I'm just trying to be simplistic here. We give a $20,000 grant to someone who needs to pave a certain road for their facility. Say it's a kid's camp. And they want $20,000. They need to pave 2,000 feet. But they come back, say, yeah, we spent the $20,000, here it is. But instead of paving 20,000 feet, they only paved 10,000 feet. So giving that grant was not effective. It didn't accomplish what was needed. So I think we need to understand that when we give out, especially grants in excess of $5,000 or $10,000, that we want to make sure that the use of that grant was effective. Whether it's holding a salmon festival to barbecue salmon, if they ask for a grant of $10,000 to serve 10,000 people, and they only serve 5, then you might want to rethink that grant because it wasn't effective. So I think we need to look at the effectiveness of the larger grants. Thanks.
Director Colburn.
Most of what I wanted to say has been said. And I wonder if there's any benefit to, thinking the complete opposite way. Municipalities that want to give grants and aid can do that from their municipalities, and everything that's outside of a municipal boundary can go to the EAAs. Do you want to? I'm just trying to think outside of the box here, right? And think about different ways that we could approach this, because I don't think we're going to come to a consensus. I believe that, and just my last thing is, I think that some of these organizations are very, very small. And I think that in the policy, it needs to say for no longer than 1 year? Can core costs be covered if they're starting up, if they're startups, things like that? I don't believe that we should be giving money to other levels of government, but I also believe that grants and aids are kind of someone's last ditch effort to get some help in a lot of cases. So I don't want to diminish that either. So I'm trying to come at this from a whole bunch of different directions and see where there might be some kind of is there a service? Is there a grant in aid service?
Well, we have a regional grants and aid, so we have that in place. The one thing about having the municipalities just, like, groups don't know where civic boundaries are, right? And so it put Campbell River in an awkward spot many times because people would come, Campbell River would give them money, and they come here, and they're great causes, and kind of it felt awkward for Campbell River to say no. So they would say yes, even though they know they've already given. But so I don't think that will work. Also, in the municipalities, we have, probably the largest dichotomy in the province is that we have Sabalis and Campbell River, 40,000 and, a couple hundred. And so we, there's not even enough to talk about that. And the other thing I just want to remind everyone, consensus on this board is 8 out of 14. Then there's no rule that says we have to be unanimous. And I think that's something that the board needs to get more used to, is that the 7 fails, 8 succeeds, and that's all there is to it. So I think it's a great goal to be unanimous, but grant and aid policy is not going to be unanimous. There's no way, right? So,
Director Dahl, and then
Just to follow up on some of what Councillor Chapman said and Councillor Colburn. First, I agree with what Doug is saying. We need to have a number that we need to report for anything over, and I think 5,000 should probably be the minimum, or maybe less than $5,000 when we donate it. We want to report back on how it went, but not just for buying, asphalt or cooking salmon, but if we give $5,000 and they use that as seed money to get more grant funding from somewhere else, at the city, we require that information. So we can look at what they did with the money, and if they used it as seed money to get more grant funding, then that's great. But we want to know that that's what they're doing. Operationally, grant funding should be a non-starter. If you can't operate without a grant, you don't actually exist anyway. So as soon as you're funding operations, you're creating a dependency. So then they're dependent on you. That means you have to give it to them next year, or what you should have done last year was not give them any money. So you're just funding the inevitable. So.
Well, I'm happy you said that because, again, hopefully Director Kern Colburn can support me. I've always been the bad guy in terms of, I hate to be that guy, but if they're operations, then you need to look at, is this a service? Do they have something that needs to be subsidized, or is it, but if it's operation money, it shouldn't be a grant and aid. But, I say my piece and then I get outvoted. But that's how it has gone through, I don't know, 80% of the grants, you see them and they're for operation stuff because they can't maintain it. And I'm not saying what they're doing is not good work, but there's lots of things we do local government that is subsidized. We acknowledge that, and then we either agree or disagree to subsidize that. So that's a decision of the board. So, but what we do is we give operations money to these groups, and we don't say, okay, let's see if there's a value to that. Because what you would do if you had an organization, let's say every year they come, they need 5 to 10 grand in operational money. I would say that should come to the board and say, like as you've said, that you don't have an operation because you don't have, but maybe it's worthy of something. Maybe it has great value. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a service. We're going to requisition money. Maybe it costs 5 cents a home. and we're going to support that. And or you say no. But we give operations money constantly, again, because we don't have policy in terms of it.
Director Lanyon.
Thank you. So I've summarized my thoughts. So key core thing to keep in mind is grants paid by us are forced donations by taxpayers. And they do, even if it's 5 cents, increase the cost of living for those taxpayers, and they should expect a return of value. So we also don't, like those forced donations do not get a tax refund or a tax credit of 50% as they would if that person had just donated directly. So they're extremely inefficient. They're also paid out of people's after-tax income when they pay their property tax bill. So it's a nightmare. We should be doing as little as possible of these, except we can use nonprofit organizations powered by volunteers to multiply the value we get for each dollar of SRD money. And that's where it makes sense for taxpayers. Like if we would be trying to achieve something in one of the areas and a volunteer can do it for a third of the price, then we should grant and aid them. I agree, no core operational funding unless the NPO achieves an SRD objective and displaces our need to spend other money in that area. And also, I think we can make room for helping NPOs that achieve our objectives start for the first 3 years. Because that might be a great thing to kickstart them. But then if you can't survive on your own and you haven't justified your value to the public after 3 years, you'll die. That's fine. Like the public didn't value it enough to keep it alive. And I think really to be responsible with this money, like there should be no exceptions. Every NPO that gets money should be a registered society. So we know who we're giving money to and who the responsible directors are.
Yeah,
Maybe one exception might be PACs, maybe, because they're closely affiliated with schools and kid related. So I think those are more easily identifiable. So yeah, I think that's all the positive stuff. The negative stuff is I do not like the idea of EAs having discretion over this. And I think there has been a history of vote buying and securing election wins. And that creates these dynasties of 20, 30 years and really hurts the ability for any competing view to get any kind of traction in the elections. So I'll 100% support a policy that directs applications through finance. And I think we should be looking at these other sort of philosophical insertions as well. And we just have to keep taxpayers in mind. Like this isn't play money. We're here to achieve objectives. And if these grants don't do that, our objective isn't to be nice. It is to get work done for taxpayers. So business-like.
Yeah, I think those are good points, and I think we've exercised some in terms of services they go, whether it be like when we started the Connected Coast, there was some seed money made available. Get yourself up and going. It's difficult, when you're trying to some of these huge objectives, whether it's just like home, when you're starting to start a business and meet your objectives. It takes a while, and you get yourself up and going, or you die. Right? And so we have exercised that in a lot of ways, and then having some parameters about, who we give it to. Do they meet the objectives of what we're trying to do? Can they do it better, cheaper, more efficiently? For sure. All great things. We basically have almost no accountability or objectives right now.
The way that we're working, well, actually, I can't say this. I'd say I think a good policy is we have our stated strategic objectives, like written in our brochure. So if your grant application doesn't satisfy at least one of those, don't even bother. It will be denied. And it can't be a loose connection. Like it needs to be like clearly, that's one of the things we're after here. Let's do it. And it can't be something that achieves one objective but hurts another one the same amount. Like it has to be an overall improvement in our overall situation. Examples would be environmental causes that kill industry. Like I don't want to give grants taxpayer money to job killing. And that's just one example. There could be lots of others too, but it can't be a net neutral for the region. It's got to be a clear and definable net positive, and just a good use of money. Like a great example of volunteer multiplication of value is the BIA. City gives $10,000 a year to do pressure washing and maintain flowers and stuff along Shoppers Row. And if the city was doing that, it would probably cost 20,000. So these are just, this is how we can get more value for our tax dollars. So
100%. And just to support that, the new gas tax agreement, for example, is there's kind of two sets of rules in there. One, if that comes to local government, but if local government wants to give money to NGOs, there's a different set of rules. And those rules, just a few of them are, well, they better achieve objectives that the local government is doing, or they can't work against, like if you're creating, if you're investing in something that is taking the spot of, let's say, infrastructure replacement. No, that's not going to work, and so on and so forth. Just like that, they can't counter. They got to support regional growth. They got to not work against the infrastructure challenges that a local government have. They're much more stringent in terms of that to complement. And because in the past they've done things that, maybe didn't create great value, didn't complement them. So, they would say, if you're going to invest in that, then that nonprofit must have an asset management plan and a long-term operations plan. Well, they don't, most of them, right? So it's like you're out. Unless you can meet objectives and mirror them of what local government is doing, then you're not going to get the money. So this falls in line to similar philosophies that we have strategic objectives. Can we find ways of investing and providing money that benefits, helps that? Absolutely. If it works against it, well, yeah, you wouldn't think we would do it. But we just have nothing right now, almost nothing.
Okay, Director Chapman, then Director Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what Director Lennon is saying. And for the most part, I've seen policies similar to this, but I've seen them go a little further and say, if you need seed money for a project, then, if you need $20,000, $30,000, then you provide a business case of how this is going to work. So there's seed money to get something off the ground. If the council or board agrees with the service being provided, then they provide operating subsidies of starting at, $5,000, $3,000, $1,000, and then that's the end of it. And if they don't survive, they don't survive. Now, in some ways, that could be a waste of money. But as you said, Mr. Leach, if it's a service that is valued by the community and by the board, then we should then create a service. If it's something we want to, if it's a service we need and it can't be sustained on its own, then we look to a service. But I agree, we're going to have to toughen up. We're going to have to get some thick skin because we're going to be criticized for getting tougher on these. And then I agree, the grants need to come to staff because that's what staff are supposed to do. And I agree that it creates dynasties when you can cut out people from grants and the board has no idea that someone's not even made it to the board table. That's just absolutely wrong and lacks transparency. Thank you.
Director Kerr, then Director Senate.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Director Lanyon, for your, I'd really like it, actually, if you were able to encapsulate that in a series of points. And
We record this, so we'll extract his genius.
But I'm just, I really do think, there was absolutely nothing there that I disagreed with during your conversation. And I think that, you might be able to just take it and put it in point form. But I think, as guiding principles, it's a totally different change. You said it's looking at it from a business point of view. And I think traditionally we've looked at grants in aid as philanthropic, like we've got all this pot of money and we're just going to give it around to look good and to help people out, act of generosity. But I really think the taxpayer, demands more than that. I really do believe that they demand accountability, and I think we need to tighten it up. So I'd really like to
In all
see that.
seriousness, we do record it, and the conversation is excellent because we will extract the conversation and formulate into the policy. So, lots of times we're just trying to inspire conversation, and we'll play it back and extract the things. Because, I don't think anyone's going to argue with, anything that's been said around the table as good philosophy. But I put it into a policy and just be prepared. There's going to be opposition, and that's fine. We discuss it. We call a question, and that's how we decide things at the board.
One more point as well, which is what's theft? It's when someone forcibly takes something from you and does not return something of equal value. And so taxation without a requisite return of value is just a form of government theft.
Okay, Director Sinnott.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to follow up on the idea of creating services, because I know in the review of some of the stuff that Kamp River is currently funding, they are quite regional in nature. And Mr. Koopman might be more interested, and I'm kind of looking at the scope of the thing. So we have various types of search and rescue types of services, and new ones come into play, like Team Aeromedical has come into play. There may be regional ones on various sort of semi-organized groups on different islands and things that might be interested. Could we create it proactively on our half? Like saying, there's an actual need for a cohesive search and rescue network, and we want to create this service, and different organizations can fall into it. Can we proactively do that, or could we direct them in to ask for a service to be created?
No, this board can direct to create as many services as they want. I mean, what you're doing is, instead of like a municipality, as you throw a big pot in there and then you decide where to carve it up, you just dissect it into these specific services, and those that want and need them, or the board supports, pay for them, and just that service. So no, the board can direct any service they want.
Because a lot of these organizations really do good work, and they need stable, sustainable funding. And I think the public would generally support having a reliable search and rescue and various types of emergency attending, like the Team Aeromedical, which if people don't know is the ER in the sky.
We supported them financially, this board, with a grant.
Yeah. So I just was curious how that would work. And then we've got other ones that hopefully with staff talking to you guys, you'll realize there really are more regional. I'd like to give more examples, because I don't think necessarily the people in the other communities know the level of regionalization that Kamp River is actually paying for.
Mr. Yates, then Director Colburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is not a regional example, but I do recall that for years there were ad hoc grants given to the community halls on Cortez Island until the board said we were prepared to continue making grants if the public will allow us to prepare and approve a service, which we did. We took it to the community, and they were overwhelmingly said, yes, we're in favor of that, so we created a service. They now have regular funding every year in the budget. There's no need to come to the board with their hand out, because it's enshrined, if you will, in a bylaw. So it's an example of what has been done here in the past.
Thank you. Director Colburn.
If I can too, just this might have relates to Director Colburn. I say this to all municipal directors that aren't from the city of Kamp River. Again, it's just the nature of the partners in this regional district. If Kamp River supports the service, then you should. There's enormous value in the other municipalities supporting it, because of the dichotomy that we have here between the size of the communities. So if there is some efficiencies in the city of Kamp River to create and redirect some things into regional services, there's an economy for Kamp River, and there's certainly a huge economy and value to the member munis in there.
Director Colburn.
Yeah, no, I'll echo that for sure. There are subsidies going on all over the place, as CALH said earlier. I think this is. I agree with most of what Director Lanyon said. I do think there should be tiered amounts for startups, for nonprofits, for further larger project type things. But absolutely, these need to go to staff. I think that is the really big hiccup with the electoral services. And I think that for follow through and for monitoring so that things don't slip through and come here repeatedly again and again, I just think that that's something that I would appreciate being in there, but also maybe a tiered, so under $500 is a certain type of expectation. From 500 to 5,000 is a different expectation, and anything more would be, that's just, I'm throwing ideas out there to maybe try to help with organizations who maybe don't have anywhere else to go, who have never found another avenue, maybe to light a fire under them, to try again, to reach out to more effectively to other organizations, or do things a little bit differently. But also realizing that some of those may fail with the moves that we're making.
Okay, thank you. Still on receipt? All in favor? Opposed?
I don't think we need a resolution, Mr. Chair. I mean, clearly, we're going to take this back and we're going to modify it some based on the discussion and the input we have here, and we'll just keep bringing it back to municipal services as we are with the electoral areas. And then once, this group is happy with what they've got, we'll put the two together and bring it to the board.
Could we also potentially have a dollar value that you might want to recommend? Or, I mean, the city's debating different models, and talk to the city staff, and you'll save yourself a lot of time. They've
Yeah,
done a lot of research.
that would be my first call. I want to talk to the city about, what they're budgeting and where it's going, and then I think we can align on what an appropriate number. In my mind, it would be an ability to redirect it here and be able to cut in the city. So you're like, I'm just going to throw this, if you're providing $100,000 there, make it 75,000 to the regional district and drop your requisition there, or whatever that be. But it would be some kind of number to provide. I don't think it would be difficult to create a greater economy at the city than what you're net paying for today.
I'll let Mr. Lanyon tell you what the percentage of our tax rate is potentially part of our grant and aids and various giveaways.
Well, would anyone from the city, would you have an idea, guess about what annually your grant and aid budget is? What is it?
It's mixed into, so pure grant and aid, which is non-core things, core things would be Tidemark Museum art galleries. There's going to be about, I'm thinking 500 grand, and then we've got about another 150 or so that's grant and aid the way we think of it here, where it's more one-offs. And then we have, about 1.5 million of leased free leases to various organizations on city-owned property, and then a further 700,000 of permissive tax exemptions for various nonprofits. So overall, that's about $3 million, which is 6.5% of our total budget is going to supporting these things. So it's very significant.
That's a lot. I'm optimistic. There's room for improvement in there. It's not the first time I've said it, and I'm not trying to pick off a scab, but when you look at, I can't remember what you called it, but your grants and aid for the arts and culture. Often arts and culture, because it's a benefit to the region as people come into there. My wife's a school teacher, and they bring their class, and they're not from Campbell River, enjoy that. Why that isn't a regional grant, for example, when you're providing all of the cost for a regional benefit, right, to get your mind around there. There's lots of room to look at those things where nothing changes except administratively, and those that benefit from it pay for it, right? So, you've outlined a lot of stuff there, and I think it won't be difficult to find financial successes in the first cut, for sure.
Director Colburn.
I have a question, and I know that it takes staff time, but you're going to do it anyways. And so I'm wondering if there is any appetite for I hate using the word report, a point form memo to go out to capture what we've discussed here to the EAs, and then a point form memo to come back here from what the EAs have just, because I'm not going to watch that meeting. I do not have the time to watch the,
Well, what, the point form memo will be a staff report. Like,
To the board.
we'll produce a staff report to
Yeah.
this committee.
Committee.
And if East members want to read it, then they'll get it, and vice versa.
Okay, and that's what I would like, is I'd like to
You'll get
read the
that.
report on what the East, kind of what they encapsulated in, because, I mean, they're part of the board, there is important, but it seems at the table here, there's this push-pull kind of, and I just want to read what they have
Yeah,
to say.
you'll get it, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, we got it all in favor. Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried.
So we don't need a subsequent, right?
No.
Okay, Regional Recreation, that the report from the CAO be received.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, Renee?
Yeah, so Renee is going to present, and the reason this is back on me is we had a presentation to the board. I think often at times the board, we have a lot of items, not a lot of time, and we don't have the ability to fully discuss certain items that and the time to do that. So the chair has been asked by more than one director that we bring this report to Municipal Services for some discussion and opportunity, should there be some inspired, some thoughts from this committee on what can come out of the regional feasibility study that we had. Again, going back, Ron will remember this, going back, the previous term is similar to what we were just talking about. The board was looking at, look, is there a way to look at all the toys that we have collectively in this region and create some economy out of a number of things we do? So there's good and bad things out of that, and we're so big and widespread, it's difficult for, you're not gonna, include the Tassus Recreation Facility in Campbell River. But in the same sense, we have maybe smaller subgroups that we can look at there. So anyways, Renee's just gonna run through a bit with a little more focus on the municipal aspect of regional recreation and see if folks have any thoughts on it.
Director Chapman.
Chair, before we start, I think the CAO brings a good point, and that is in the smaller communities, especially when it comes, I know specifically when it comes to lifeguard training, that to get someone into the community to train lifeguards is almost impossible unless you've got about 10 to 12 people. So I think, we could cooperate with just the training aspect of it, if allowing these people to come out and join in, say, for instance, Campbell River, when they're doing lifeguard training, to have others join in so that they have the training, because these pools cannot operate unless you got trained staff. And sometimes, I know in Tassus, the pool was closed for 2-3 weeks because we had there wasn't any trained people there. So I think we can help initially, as the CAO was saying, with especially, training issues. It's harder for the smaller communities.
Just if I can add on to this, if it's worth anything to anybody, regional fire is a good example, and I think we're off with a lot of great ideas. Obviously, Campbell River's not going to go fight a fire and say that's not going to happen, but there's many things collectively that we can support throughout that. The other thing that I think personally is worth a value, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but things have just existed because they've existed that way for many years. I know when I moved into the valley in Comox or Courtney, they would close the pool down at, 5 o'clock on Sundays. And I thought, that's like, why do they do that? That's weird, Sundays. And long story short, it just turned out that the guy that ran it didn't want to work Sunday nights, and it's been closed Sunday nights for 30 years. And it's like nobody's ever questioned that, and that's why it happened. So similar here, we've run things a certain way, and that is, maybe benefited some areas, maybe hurt other areas. And sometimes it's just good for a fresh set of eyes to look at it and say, why is that happening that way? And often the answer is that's just because the way we've done it. It's not because it makes any real sense. So this is just an opportunity again. I'm not saying anything earth-shattering come out of it. It's an opportunity just to have another lens at it and look and say, why the heck are we doing that? So one of the motions that came out of even the East is that why isn't areas A, B, and C looked at participating in the Strathcona function gardens? And so we'll explore that because I wasn't here when it happened, but I mean, I wonder why when they split the regional districts, why it was Area D and Campbell River and Strathcona Gardens, why it wasn't visited upon anyone else. I have no idea. I can never find anything or any reason. I just think it was probably negotiated by people and lobbied by folks, and there wasn't any real science behind it. And then you just keep up and you go that way, right? Like, why was the gardens, which is, I don't know, 3-4 kilometers south of the Sportsplex, included in regional recreation, and the Sportsplex wasn't? It's closer to Area D. I mean, I have never been able to find anyone that says, why wasn't the Sportsplex part of regional recreation? I mean, it's physically closer to Area D. So there's a lot of things out there that just happened for one reason or the other, or somebody's negotiated or lobbied, and it doesn't mean it was fair, doesn't mean it's right, it just existed. And so this is an opportunity to have a lens on that. And I know a motion was made at East to say, well, look at the contributions into Strathcona Gardens as the partnerships to that. So, and the study provided other opportunities to look at the things in the report as well, so.
Good afternoon, Chair Baker and directors. So as mentioned, just wanted to highlight some elements from the recreation study that relate to municipalities. As you'll remember from August, the reason we did the study was to explore the opportunities and challenges of regional collaboration, to identify ways that collaboration could occur, and to really provide a resource to staff and decision makers about future initiatives that could happen. So you may recall this graph from August that really just highlights the continuum of collaboration efforts, ranging from regional recreation system optimization, which really means, increasing the dialogue and collaboration amongst staff and elected officials, all the way to amalgamating service delivery. So the study did suggest that we should pursue the optimization as well as have some further conversations about sub-regional funding. So I just wanted to highlight some of the regional recreation opportunities that were highlighted in the study. And one being recognizing that sport and recreation can be a platform to achieve reconciliation. During the engagement portion of the study, conversations with the municipalities did agree that recreation is a platform to advance reconciliation. And so one of the opportunities is to encourage collaboration with Indigenous organization and First Nations in recreation programming. The second there is to broaden the equity and inclusion focus by increasing offerings of low barrier programming. So by doing that, we would strengthen social cohesion and support resilience among the district. An example of that is the Life Pass that's currently offered between the gardens and at the Sportsplex for low-income individuals. Another example could be training and increasing capacity of staff when working with diverse populations. As Director Chapman mentioned, training across our organizations is a synergy that could happen. And also establishing a mechanism or service to strengthen dialogue and collaboration with municipalities, school divisions, public health, and First Nations. Director Colburn in August mentioned a value-added recreation piece for the region that could include, all the recreation offerings that are available throughout the region, and it would not only benefit residents but also people visiting our community. Another idea was one-stop booking for facilities such as, school, playgrounds, city, as well as the gardens. Through our emergency services program, the SRD did partner with life-saving programs that were in the region, and that was a partnership with some of the First Nations and successful in delivering those out in the region. And then, collaboration with these groups to capitalize on some of the natural synergies between recreation, public health, and education would benefit the entire region. Number 4 there, examine collaboration beyond facilities to include outdoor activities. Director Sinnott mentioned this also in August. Expanding the study to include outdoor assets such as trails, hiking, mountain biking, and ocean-based activities. And then there was significant discussion about further exploring funding models for regional or sub-regional facilities. So we did, just wanted to highlight those and look for clarity and direction for any further action regarding regional recreation. I think it was, just to open the discussion there.
Director Sinnott.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much for refreshing that report. And I took a second look today and looked at some of the data, and there seems to be a lot of outdoor activity, particularly in the more rural areas that people really want to access. And so even sitting here thinking about things, besides talking about ocean access, I remember going back down to the Campbell River a few years ago and noticing that they'd built some accessible fishing platforms. And so I don't know if we can do that in other river areas in the regional district so that people who are elderly or with limited ability to walk have easier access to do fishing on river sides and things like that. And then I was talking to a client today who came down from Sayward, and they come down and use the motocross place, which I'm not sure whether that can be expanded out to other areas in the regional area. There seems to be a lot of rural areas where you could do some ATV biking kind of things. And we had the ATV club that came and presented, I think, to the city about using the access to the trails. And we have that unique advantage on the North Island because we're not Mosaic where they've gated everything. And hopefully we can work with Western and the various timber companies to maintain that unique access and develop more recreational, because I think a lot of people do that. Plus, the idea of using the different shooting ranges that we have. Like, I think Campbell is very limited for outdoor shooting right now because they're still waiting for certification, but Sabre still is open. So you do have that access to that. So people probably don't know the various, shooting is a sport, whether you're using skeet or 22s or whatever, you can go down to Comox and do it. Then we have the lakefront development areas, and I spent a little time because I saw what they did in the gorge down in Victoria. Has anyone seen the view? I can't remember what it's called there, but they did a big dockage area. And then down in Kelowna, they've also got the huge bouncy castle that looks like it's probably as big as this building pretty much. And they put it on the lakefronts. Now, I'm not saying that you guys are going to do it every rural lake, but you could probably do smaller versions. I'm assuming in the rural areas that you've got lake access and you guys do recreate in your various lakes and waterfronts.
If you're looking at me to answer, my recreation area is in Mount Waddington.
Well, we can talk regionally
Which is
even
so
more.
weird, right? Yeah.
But then the other one came to me is growing up here before we had ice, we had skating up at Echo Lake. But I'm assuming as we get further into Gold River and the interior, we have more access potential lake skating in smaller lakes and potentially. I'm just saying it's a cool, unique experience that you don't actually see too often on the coast because we do have the colder climates and things like that. And answering your question about Willow Point Park growing up here, it was just a city park. It was just a city field and a lot of woods. So I'm assuming the city decided to build a structure on it and it was just their land, so they just did it. So that's why it didn't become regional at the time. I mean, I wasn't here for that decision, or I was very young, but I still remember it being just a plain old open field growing up because I grew up in that area. So, but I am interested in exploring more regionalization, and particularly the outdoor pool, because I was learning about the synergies with lifeguarding and the needs to sort of keep the staff from flipping back and forth, the issues there, as well as if we can 3/4 season it, if we can do any types of expansion of the facility. Or we talked once about providing all-weather cover for certain fields regionally, like getting the regional district involved with that. I think people of Alberta and maybe other regions would be very interested in having more cover for our recreation in the winter. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's kind of lends to what Director Lanian was saying about, working against each other. We both operate a pool. We both have lifeguards. We both buy the same product and, equipment, and that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. There's got to be some synergies with that. There's the sportsplex and the field down there. The reality is you're providing recreation for a lot of people outside of the community. Again, I know my wife teaches Miracle Beach. That's outside Campbell River, and that school is coming to Campbell River constantly, right? Like, you've got these amenities, and there's opportunities certainly there. So, just trying to shine a light on it and see if you're inspired or want to direct further action, looking at some opportunities. Because if they don't come from this board or council, they don't happen. So,
Director Davis.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, great discussion, and I appreciate Director Chapman's comments regarding training and synergies there, because it's something we always do struggle with in Tassus, to keep enough lifeguards. And now we're looking at finding the money to train somebody for reopening our climbing wall. So that would be very helpful if there's some synergies there. I'm also really supportive of anything that has anything to do with upgrading some of the trails in the regional district, like on the road between Gold River and Tassus, and places that people have used for years, which are frankly falling apart because there has been no money going towards it for years. I don't know how they were funded in the past. I'm just talking about trails, boardwalks, parking, signage, things like that. Also, we're seeing a huge upsurge in the last couple of years in bikes coming into Tassus. And by that, I mean mountain bikes, e-bikes, that sort of thing. And I know I've already been talking with Modi about this in terms of having some safety signage along the road regarding them, but it could be signage regarding sites like camping, that kind of thing. So having a regional strategy for all of this would be really useful rather than doing it ad hoc. Because I know for Tassus, we do everything here in-house, but we also do provide services that are outside our community, which really should be more of a regional thing. So anyway, good discussion. Thanks.
Director.
Sorry if I can just interject there, Mr. Chair. So it's going to come up here at probably the next municipal services meeting, but tourism and what Martin has just discussed in terms of that is similar to that. I always remember Destination Campbell River would come and present to the regional board. And if I remembered one thing, it was folks don't come specifically to Campbell River, they come to the region. They come to explore all the areas of it, and you have to go up in a rising tide to succeed in terms of that. And so when you talk about, outdoor recreation or trails and that, that needs to be or has to be the same philosophy. If you want to succeed in that, then everyone needs to participate. You can't just look at what we can extract out of Campbell River and be centric there. that it needs to be participation from folks throughout the region.
Yeah, if I could just add to it, I mean, everything that brings more people into the region as a whole also benefits Campbell River because that's the hub where everybody goes through. And if we can do things like establishing other campsites within, well, in our area, Area A, on the way to Tassus, that would be such a benefit to all of us.
Director Colburn.
Everybody's stealing my thunder here. These are exactly the lines that I was thinking, especially in collaboration with kind of rec sites and trails. I think that there is something that we can really, there are some really stellar spots that are really well taken care of. And I believe that that is a function of Tourism Vancouver Island North, which belongs to Waddington. And so the relationships that they have with WFP, with, work to enhance and maintain those recreation assets. I think there's also opportunities to do things like, I know a lot of the folks from Zabalas come down here, they come to MacIver Lake, right? So if there's opportunities to come down here and do lifeguarding courses, to do some kind of work with, I know that it's a privately run organization, but SPL, Strathcona Park Lodge, things that are enhancing the knowledge of people who are out there as well. I think that in kind of like a possibly kind of community futures type way, helping them to get into an ecotourism business or do some kind of guiding somewhere. There's opportunities for like high roping in the region. There's some crazy climbing availability out here. It's amazing. And then lifeguarding, those were the two, lifeguarding and climbing. But there are other ways to use the assets for even something simple like fishing from the pier. People don't do that. They don't know how to do that until they come to Campbell River. That sets people up for going sports fishing on the West Coast, right? So, using these assets to the best of our ability and kind of having a tourism recreation kind of a hub or finding some synergies within that helps us all in the region.
Okay, anyone else? Director Chapman.
I want to drive Director Lanyon crazy with this concept. But as part of public administration and public concept of benefiting a community, when I was at university, the example was given that you're operating a pool. It could be anything, but in this case, it's a pool. And it takes $100 a day to run that pool. Is the community better off with one user paying $100 or 100 users paying $1? And the debate goes around, and basically the community is better off with 100 users paying $1 because there's more physical activity for the general population. So the finances is one thing, and it's an important thing. But, when you have trails, how do you recover costs for that? Or is it just going to be just a simple, we could issue day use permits for, hiking trails if we develop hiking trails and camping areas, but how do we do some cost recovery and not stick it to the taxpayer to cover all of it?
So that is a tricky one. First, I thought your first question was a trick question because I thought that's a no-brainer. It's 100 people. Was everyone else thinking that? Were you thinking that too, or not? Were you?
It's just one.
But what would your answer have been? 100 or 1? Okay, thank you. Good. So I was like, man, it's 100. Doug, what are you talking about? The other thing, though, I don't know if this drives Ben crazy or not, but I'll give you an example. And maybe it's just us using our liberty, but I agree with that philosophy. I think if you said people are active in a community and they're healthy, what's the direct payout? Well, who knows, right? But the like healthier, active people are gonna maybe be a less burden on the healthcare system or things like that. So, one of the things that we invest in is that we had growing community spending, but for recreation, we bought a bus because one of the biggest inhibitors for kids participating in programs and keeping them active. So look, kids can get in trouble after school. Their parents maybe got to leave work or their business or whatever to drive them. And that seemed like a huge barrier to them engaging in more programs at the facility. So we buy a bus and we're trying to engage with the school district as much as we can to get the kids from the school to the facility. Comes at a pretty small cost, gets hundreds and hundreds of kids more active, allows their parents to do their thing, stay at their job, get people out. I don't know how you physically measure that, but it certainly feels like that provides an indirect benefit to the community financially in some way. Hard to track it. That's my belief. Does that drive you crazy? Okay, because I think that's what, you can't always, like you said, that trail, you can't charge admission for a trail, but how does that pay you back? I think that's part of the board and council's decision to kind of look at those things and think, is there a indirect payback to the community, right? And those things I think are definitely, that's what the board looks at. Okay, shall we invest in that? Even though I'm going to put $1 in, maybe $3 will come back. It's like tourism says that all the time, right? Like you get people come in, you invest $1, you get 2, 3, 4 back, but it spreads out all through the community, right? So I think in terms of, now Susan mentioned the, I'm not going to mention any names, but it's always thorn in my side, talk about covered facilities and kind of the philosophy of it. Like it rains here a lot, this is British Columbia. And so when we were looking at Strathcona Gardens and upgrades and changes, we did a bunch of tours, and we would go tour facilities, and recreation's a subsidy. We all know that. But many facilities said, hey, you got these one things, these bubbles that they'll play tennis and indoor soccer. You can rent these things out for 300 plus days a year, and they actually pay for themselves. It's something in recreation. I was like, this is amazing. And two of the directors, they might have been from Campbell River at the time, said, nobody plays tennis in Campbell River, and it was a dead issue. So when I go back to why are we doing certain things or why are we not looking at it, like that's why we have no indoor facilities like that. And that was one of those that, this is gonna be fantastic. It's not gonna, we'll actually pay the thing off in 5 years, they said. And you rent them for grads, indoor soccer, tennis, pickleball, everything. And then, you find out nobody plays tennis here, or so some people thought, and we don't have one. So, there's a lot of things out there. We need discussion and thoughts and ideas like this to try to explore those ideas, and not just subsidize things, but things that come up with a direct benefit and an indirect benefit, so that we have a positive impact to the community.
Director Chapman.
Am I first in line? When I worked in Sechelt, I think it was the tennis club, it was the racquetball club, doesn't matter. They came to the municipality looking for a $50,000 grant to purchase one of these bubble buildings, and it was maintained by Air Pressure, and it was actually fairly cheap. It was only about $370,000 at the time, and it was huge. It was equivalent of like at least 4 tennis courts. 3 or 4 tennis courts in this one covered area. It was very popular, heavily used, and in turn for giving a $50,000 grant, they would give reduced fees for, the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts doing their things that they could do indoors. And graduation ceremonies were often held in this bubble type thing, and it was very, very effective. So certainly, if that were to come up, I'd be interested in looking at that again, because that was that was a success.
Director Sinnott.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring everyone back to what was something in Camp River, because I grew up here, a really sad waterfront that is now a beautiful waterfront that people, even when I read the Comox Valley rant and rave, they're like, how does Camp River have such a gorgeous waterfront with the seawalk? And if you recall, it was just a little asphalt strip that apparently the city didn't want and the Rotary forced on everybody. But I would recommend that we do that in every one of our communities, to start looking for that scenic waterfront, if preferably walkway. And the reason you do waterfront is because people love to walk where it's interesting. And our waterfront, thankfully, has a lot of different marine traffic, so it's interesting and always changing. That's why you don't always want it just to be in the forest. Forest's okay, but people would prefer to walk along a retail street because it changes than they would necessarily beside a bunch of bushes that don't change. But the waterfront's a perfect example, and we live where people have a lot of waterfront. And if I was going to support something regionally, it would be to at least identify that sort of equivalent sea walk in every community to start developing, or river walk, so that people could have that benefit, because it changed our city. I would say it's one of the most transformational things that changed the city of Camp River. So, and you could create the river waterfront walk network and everyone could come visit them all over the region.
Okay, still on receipt. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Director Dahl.
I'd like to move that the Kelsey Center be included in the additional participation report for electoral area A in the village of Sayward.
Second.
Director Chapman, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Bylaws, none. Correspondence, none. Director's reports, none. New business, none. Addendum, none. Closed session, none. Termination.
Move termination.
Second.
Boy, they're quick on that, aren't they? Discussion.
Trying to get back on time.
All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. We are now terminated. Thank you, folks.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great long weekend.
So what happened